All right, so other day I was telling a family member that I was going to do this talk. I was going to do a talk here, and she asked, "What's your talk about?" And I say, "It's Bitcoin related. I don't want to explain it. Go to a search engine." And she's 65 years old, and she says, "No, I saw it on TV. It's computer money, right?" Exactly. Anyways, if you made that trip to the search engine, you might find something like this, like, "Hey, it's a big revolution. It's going to change society. It's going to change money. It's going to change everything," right? So I don't hop to any conclusions on that, but there has been a revolution. There's been a revolution related to this. At a minimum, there's been a revolution in cryptography in the last 30 years. And there's been a revolution in, maybe that revolution is probably also a technological revolution too. So I'm going to try and leave this up as long as I can. If anyone wants to decode this, it's symmetric encryption. So the same knowledge I required to encrypt it is the same knowledge you required to decrypt it. The key is 13. Rotate 13. Has anyone got that one down or know what it says? Yeah, you're close. We got time.
It says drink more beer.
No. Almost there. All right, I'm going to move us on. It says, where did my Bitcoins go? I didn't hear you. You got to shout it out. Okay, so that's symmetric encryption. We've had actually two revolutions in cryptography. We've gotten symmetric encryption that's a lot better than that, and we've got asymmetric encryption. So here's the classic example of what you can do with asymmetric encryption. Bob wants to send Alice a message, so Bob acquires. You have two keys. You have a private key and a public key. So in this case, yeah, Alice's public key, Alice's private key. So Bob gets a copy of Alice's public key. He's able to encrypt his message. Alice gets the ciphertext. She's able to decrypt it with her private key. This is the other thing you can do with public key cryptography that's more relevant to Bitcoin here. So you're sending a message, and you can prove to anyone who's got your public key that it's you that sent the message, or at least it's whoever has the corresponding private key that sent the message. So the way the Bitcoin network works is that you're sending out messages, and this is an idea people thought of 30 years ago when public key crypto came along. They said, hey, you can control your money by signing a message to say, hey, my funds go here now, my funds go here now. So Bitcoin takes advantage of that. And that means key management is really, really critical. You've got to, your private key, is not something you want to be regenerating again because your funds are attached to it. You lose it, you lose your funds, right? And so, it may not be the case that everyone's going to want to get into key management. They might entrust that to other people. So, and here's a bit more about how it works in Bitcoin land. So, relationship between private key, public key is there. One's derived from the other. And when someone sends you, if you request funds from someone, you're going to give them not your public key, but you give them a hashed version of it. So in this case, I abbreviate it, 1 Satoshi, blah, 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 blah. So, and then when you want to claim funds that have gone to that address, a hash version of your public key, so you haven't actually published the public key up to that point, which is going to provide some security against quantum computers. But when you're actually ready to claim it, then you sign a message saying, yeah, I got the public key, I got the private key. You guys know this address is derived from it. I'm moving it over here to Edward Snowden. There's actually is a vanity Bitcoin address for the Edward Snowden Support Fund. So I didn't put them out in full, though, here. I just 5 characters, moved on. Okay, so the part I'm going to skip over about Bitcoin and hand it over because it's not actually what my talk is about. And it's actually the thing that got everybody excited about it. It's a peer-to-peer decentralized network that, and it's got a ledger system where it's storing who's got what amount of value. So how you get a peer-to-peer network to actually agree on who's got what is a challenging problem. That's kind of held people up for years. The private key, public key stuff, people figured out right away, hey, you could do money with that. And it's easy if you centralize it. It's hard if you decentralize it. Anyways, I'm not going to explain how that works. These are the buzzwords that you can punch into a search engine if you want to learn more about how Bitcoin does that stuff. Interestingly enough, Bitcoin's solution isn't the only one. There's also something called proof of stake that you can do to distribute stuff. And a system called Ripple has an interesting consensus system they came up with where, unlike in Bitcoin, where the nodes don't have to trust each other at all, in Ripple you can have like a certain minimal amount of trust that people won't collude with each other. But it's a good design. You should look into it. But on to this. Okay, so offline, right? If your money's valuable enough, you're not going to keep your private key on a computer you're hooking up to the internet. If you're, and this is what big players are doing. They're keeping it offline. And so one of the modes of doing this is you sign your message saying, okay, funds are moving over here. You carry it through SneakerNet, maybe on a flash drive, and then you put it out to Bitcoin land, right? Yeah, exactly. All right. Another sort of way to think offline is that you generate your private key and you don't even have to store it on a computer. You could store your private key on a piece of paper and put that in your safety deposit box. And then it's sort of when you want to redeem that and move the funds again, then you move it to a computer that's online and tell Bitcoin land, okay, funds are moving. And then another version of this is you memorize something that your private key can be derived from, and of course, rubber hose cryptography comes into play if you're doing that. So, and it's also comes back to key management too. You're like, if it's strong enough to not be crackable or guessable to others, then you have a good chance of forgetting it. So, not the best option, but that is the most offline thing you can have. Like it's not even in your safe anywhere else. Okay, so offline solves all your problems, right? You don't have the internet is dangerous, and if your private key isn't on the internet, everything's going to be okay, right? Well, of course not. So here's some things that can go wrong in an offline system, and these could go wrong for 2 reasons. They could go wrong by way of a bug in the software you're using to generate keys offline. Or what if the software you're obtaining, even if it's from one of the major Bitcoin wallet softwares, what if there's been a compromise upstream, right? So HTTPS isn't going to help you there. Okay, great, you have a secure path to getting the wrong thing. Then PGP signing it isn't going to help you if they've screwed up. If they're just signing something they've built, and how closely are they checking what they're building, right? So those are the 2 reasons things could go offline, be it a bug or be it malice on the side you get stuff from. Okay, so there could be a misuse of your cryptographically secure random number generator because you want to generate your private keys from a random source. So if that's not up to crypto grade, then yeah, you could have a bad time. One possible disaster would be so your public key is derived from your private key, and then your Bitcoin address is derived from your public key. So there's a chain there to screw up. And so if you tell people send funds to this public Bitcoin address, and they say it looks like a good address, it passes the checksums, you may never actually be able to claim it if your private key doesn't actually correspond to the public key that corresponds to that address. So if you generate that wrong, you'll be in trouble. And sometimes people aren't storing the private key itself, but some kind of seed, such as a good passphrase, hopefully, or maybe they'll store 128 bits and hash that to get the 256 bits that the key is. So if that correspondence isn't correct, you could be in trouble. And of course, if you're doing seeds instead of storing the whole private key, then you want to make sure that isn't too small. And so if it's small enough to memorize, you might be in trouble. Or if the process that you do that conversion from seed to key, you could have a flaw there where you're actually converging on a smaller space than you think you are. You're taking 90 bits and turning it into a 40-bit space. And then you don't want to do this when you're signing stuff. Sony got in a level. The public key signing system in Bitcoin is ECDSA, and Sony got in a lot of trouble with that because there's I don't know the crypto details exactly, but you're supposed to when you do your signatures, you're supposed to generate some random data and not reuse it for your next signature, or else you're giving away too much info. So Sony did that, and with consequences. Right, you don't want your wallet software logging stuff intentionally, unintentionally in places where you don't think it is if you're trying to clean it up, because then someone else might be able to find your private key that way when they catch up with it later. So someone knocks on your door and you're sure your machine was never ever connected to the internet, but it's got writable firmware, it's got a writable hard drive, so could be there. And all that kind of comes to what I'm going to talk about later is like you've even if you trust the software you're using to generate private key and public key pairs offline, you want to do that on a platform of hardware and operating system software that you trust. So if you can't trust your platform, then you can get lied to. You could even audit the code in the way I'm going to be talking about here, and the platform could lie to you. It could show you what you're expecting the code to look like, and that even when you do checksums and all that stuff, but you might actually be running something else. So platform trust is something you may want to start thinking about when you're dealing with large amounts of Bitcoin value offline. Oh yeah, so it could thwart your audit or it could log your key. So I think anyone who's really big in this space should actually be thinking about not just downloading binaries from the leading wallet services and running them, but actually reading the code and compiling it. And of course, you got to make sure you trust your compiler and the system you build it on. And you really have to audit everything in a program. So most of these programs are graphical, okay? And so you can't just audit the key cryptographic parts because, as we say in the world of dynamic languages, there's a concept of monkey patching, right? So if there's something malicious in the code that's drawing your pretty windows, it could be patching the part of your program that does the critical stuff. So you really have, if you're going to be auditing your software, like reading all the code before running it and compiling it and running it, you really have to read everything because of monkey patching. Which of course, can be done, there's the equivalent in the compiled world too. It's not just it's nice and easy in dynamic languages like Python, but it's doable in anything. And that's just a reference to the last slide for anyone who catches it in passing. Okay, so when you're doing an audit of the code, the amount of code you have to look at to do that makes a big difference. So on the left here, we've got the 4 largest wallet software programs in the 4 most established wallet software programs in Bitcoin land. They all have graphical user interfaces. I figured putting this graph in lines of code would go over people's head. So I was using a lines of code counting program, and it outputs in dollar values. So I'm going to use that as my metric for code complexity and how much time it takes to audit it. Okay, so $3 million for Armory, $800,000 for Electrum at the smallest. That's me there, offline Audible at 27,000, which it seems like a high number to me. I don't feel like I put that much work into it so far. But Similar, kind of in a similar spirit to what I'm doing is PyWallet and No Brainer. They're both like command line only, no GUI, so that there's way less code there to look at. I thought what I was working on was small until I discovered No Brainer. It's not as featureful, but it outputs an encoding of 90 bits like that, and that's all it does. It says, here's your Bitcoin address, here's your 90 bits that you need to write down from a word dictionary, and that's it. And it does that in about 30 lines. Okay, so I've been beaten by No Brainer, and then I've also highlighted on the right the ECDSA library that we're all using. If I came here today and told you folks that I wrote my own ECDSA implementation from scratch, you would I would hope somebody would pull a weapon or something, because like that's a no-no. Electrum, PyWallet, my code, No Brainer, they all use this Python ECDSA library. So lots of people are presumably already looking at it and seeing it does some of the most critical stuff related to what I said earlier. So either we're all in this together. Either we're all screwed or we're all probably fine. Anyways, this graph is a bit unreadable too for comparisons. So here's it in logarithmic scale, just to get a better sense. I'm gonna move on from that. Okay, so my motivation for thinking in terms of I want to generate Bitcoin addresses offline, and I want the code that does that to be auditable. Is one thing that's come up is we've got two members at Skullspace, our local hackerspace, who are having a baby, and I said, hey, this Bitcoin thing could maybe worth a lot in 18 years, or maybe it won't be worth anything, and it'll make a good story. So I'm gonna put forward about $20 worth once this new Skullspace baby comes into the world, and so I want to tell those folks, hey, I want you to hold it offline, generate it offline, and hold it 18 years. Don't touch it. You gotta hold it for life assets. The kid's old enough. And so it occurred to me that if you're going to be sitting on it that long, and you want to avoid the temptation of moving it around and possibly putting it on a computer where bad stuff can happen, then that's where auditability adds something, because you can go back and look at how it was generated and say, I have nothing to worry about. It's going to be okay. Though we'll see what happens to the crypto over this time period. A lot of people think the quantum computers are going to, maybe they'll be scaled up enough to break ECDSA by then, but they got to break the two hashing algorithms as well, because you just put a Bitcoin address out on the network. It's a hashed version using two different hashing algorithms of your public key. So until you're redeeming and moving funds out of that address for the first time, no one. You got three crypto problems to solve with your with whatever the computers of the future are. So 18 years isn't out of the question, maybe for just holding and looking back at the code and saying it was fine, just hold. Okay, so we're going to demo some of what I put together. All right, so I've got there's no GUI, but I've got a command line version of this, and I've got a printed menu version of this. And I say printed menu because I'm not using fancy, or for the most part, except for one exception later, I'm not using fancy libraries for doing graphics in a terminal. So you could actually use the menu version and the command line version on a teletype if you're going that offline, So simple case is key generation. So this is an encoding of a private key. This is a coding of a Bitcoin address that corresponds to that private key. And this is in what's called the wallet import format. It's supported by all the wallets. So if you wrote this down, kept it in a safety deposit box, maybe laminated, or in your mattress, you can count on this being well enough known that it's going to be supported a long time out. If you didn't write this down as well, no big deal. You can, maybe you want to do this anyways as one more test, right? You can see that when you can restore it years later and get the same address out. Okay, so here's a more pretty version. I'm going to do this with the command line version so I can get into that, or the menued version. Okay, do you want to generate a key, restore a key, or quit? I'm generating a key. Do you want to just directly generate a private key, or do you want to derive one from a seed or a passphrase? The last two I haven't even implemented yet, so just straight to key. Do you trust your crypto-grade random number generator from your operating system, which in some cases is depending on random number generators from to some extent from your processor maker, right? So if you don't trust those, you can supplement it a bit with some dice rolls. And the keyword there is supplement. You don't want to give the user the option to just provide you randomness from their own source, because they're probably not going to provide you enough bits, and you don't want to fill it out with zeros, right? So so here we'll add some dice rolls. Okay, we got 1 byte out of that, and the rest still came from the RNG, and then we hashed it so there's no common prefixes. Okay, output format. So this time around I'll use the dictionary words. So there we go. So you wouldn't expect to memorize these unless you've built a memory palace in your mind. That's sort of a technique for memorization. But one advantage to maybe writing these down is there's a few advantages. One would be because you're writing an entire word and not a letter at a time. Like, it doesn't matter if you screw up a letter a bit. Like, if you're not sure if this is N-E-E-I-L or I can't even think of a variation. It was not a good example. All right, so yeah, the dictionary I'm using to provide this word list is in RFC 1760, which was a one-time password scheme. So really nifty thing about that dictionary is even if this code is gone at some point, I'm dead, GitHub's dead, etc. Somebody's going to have that RFC mirrored out there, right? Whereas, who knows, maybe people will even forget the base 58 encoding I was showing you. So this, really, if you knew that RFC 1760 was used for this, and you found that years later, you could, even without the source code, you could reconstruct the fact that these 24 words are encoding 32 bytes or 256 bits, and you could go from there. So we'll try copy paste this. And then there's the corresponding Bitcoin address, and then we'll do a redemption, quit, restoration. All right, 1M, blah, 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 ends in KV. 1M, blah, blah, ends in KV. Okay. And then you've got the wallet import format. So there's a restore. We'll come back to the demo mode. So this is the thing that I'm a little more excited about. I've put together a 2 of 3 scheme for storing the 32 bytes or 256 bits of key data. And so and there's 2 situations that have come up where I think that's going to be useful. I mentioned, okay, you could write your private key down on paper and put it in your safety deposit box, right? But what if you don't trust entirely that bank's employees aren't going to look in there and just copy it down, right? Unlike having a gold bar, you're not even going to notice that it's gone until they use it, and that might be down the road. So the exclusive OR provides a really interesting way you can have you can split things up with redundancy. This is what's used in RAID 5 for disk storage, so where you can have the amount of disk space used being like say 2 disks, but you got it across 3 disks, so you can afford to lose 1. That's a bit of a joke. Okay, so this is where this comes in, the algebra of exclusive OR. So A XOR B is C. What if you've lost B? Well, you can recover B from A XOR C. And if you've lost A, you can recover it from B XOR C. And so I'll just show a bit how I use this. Okay, so say your 32-bit key, or 32 bytes, 256 bits key is A. You could generate another random 32 bytes, call it B. And you could XOR them. see? And you could chunk each of them up like this. And then you could stripe them. So you say, well, okay, we're going to organize them into these 3 colors, and then arrange them this way. I've got 3 names on here because one of the applications for this is if at Skullspace we're going to hold a little bit of Bitcoin long term, and so we're going to have 3 trustees who are each going to have 1/3 of the key data and a little bit extra data, so that any 2 of them could come together and recreate the private key and move the funds. So that's not only redundancy on someone losing it, but also just someone disappearing or someone not being one of the 3 not being in agreement, right? It only takes 2 out of 3 to agree to it. So you can see here, Ian's got the first third, A sub 0 of actual key data, and no more. The rest is random. I've got A sub 1, and Stefan's got A sub 2. So, okay, so if Stefan gets hit by a bus, you can recombine these and find his part. And if I get hit by a bus, then Stefan and Ian can come together and so on. Okay. So I'll just demo this. Slightly smaller terminal window. I've still got some curses related bugs here. And I'll show you why. This is the exception. This is where I am using curses. And you'll see why in a moment. Oops, wrong dear. Okay, we're going to generate a private key. How do we want to generate it? Just direct to a key from a random source. Okay, we're doing 2 of 3 Zor scheme. And so then, yeah, you can also provide your own entropy on the, what I had as B there, the second random stream. So here, we'll just do this. All right, now we're using curses, and you're about to see why it's handy. So when I bring Ian and Stefan together to do this, I want to make sure that, assuming we all trust the platform we're running on, and that's a big if, we can at least have a process where we get it all started up together, we get it this far, one of us can grab our part, write it down, verify that we've got it right, and then clear the screen so the next guy can do it. So, okay, are we ready for the first component? Yes, we are. Write it down. Write it down. And I mentioned in the text here another alternative to writing it down. If you're using a password manager on a computer because you got lots of things you need to not forget, and you've made the effort to memorize a really strong encryption passphrase from that, well then maybe that's another place you would be storing something like this. But you're probably doing that on an online computer, so things can still go wrong. But it's an option. At least you can back it up that way too. You can it's in your head. The decryption key is in your head, and the actual chunk of data that you need to decrypt is in a bunch of places. Okay, so we're gonna. So now's the test. Did I remember it? Yes, I did. You got it. So now I say next, and then I say, okay, now it's Ian's turn. You come and get a chunk of the key here. So same thing. Blah, blah, blah. Oops. All right, test time. Yeah, you got it. Component 3. Got it. Okay, and then we're done. If you look at then in the scroll buffer, there wasn't a way for one of us to look back at what else was going on. Though, yeah, we do have to trust that one of us didn't, set the platform up with key logging or memory logging or whatever. So that doesn't go away. But okay, here's our Bitcoin address that those 3 chunks of data corresponded to, and we'll just attempt to restore. Okay, so who should we kill off? Number 1, number 2, number 3. Okay, I forget who was who. Ian was number 1, we'll say. So restore, key, restore. Number 1 is blank. Number 2, I got to quote this. Number 3. Good catch. Thank you very much. And I forgot the flag, that's all. SOAR RFC 1760. Okay. 1 MPJ, blah, 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 ends in VS. 1 MPJ, ends in VS. Okay, so there, we were able to recover. Okay, so we got lots of bonus time, so I've got bonus material. I mentioned that even when you're offline, the platform you're running this all on that either compiles your code, that lets you inspect your code with a text editor, that lets you inspect it with checksumming tools, you're depending on that not lying to you, and so this could matter if you were using had keys that had a lot of money tied to them, or maybe if you get into sort of a computer science dystopia. So we'll just imagine a world where every new platform that comes out is untrustworthy and is betraying you in some way. But they haven't been bothered, whoever they is, to get rid of all our old equipment. It's still sitting in our closets, and you can go and get it on the black market. But the dystopian world is putting out software that promises to not betray you, to run on your platform. They're putting it out there on the dark net, and they're putting guys with it out there in the dark alley. And so, okay, you might have some really old machines like this in your closet: original Mac, an Amiga 1000, an IBM PC. As it turns out, as soon as consumer-friendly machines like this came around, we actually got into a little bit of trouble for this scenario. Okay, all of these machines have firmwares, and the Amiga and the Mac had pretty fancy firmwares. This is an Amiga firmware, but those firmwares no longer had features built in for you to program the machine just relying on the hardware and the firmware. You had to have external media, hard drives, floppy drives, cassette drives to make them do anything. They were no longer, unlike previous microcomputers, they were not self-programmable. So all those ones I just showed are actually kind of useless because, yeah, you go to the guy in the black market and he says, yeah, I've got an Ubuntu 12.04 CD for you, but how do you know? How do you know it wasn't burnt recently and is compromised in some way and it's not, and you can't use it you can't rely on it as part of your platform before running whatever you're running. So we've got a bootstrapping problem here. Big-time bootstrapping problem. And it turns out there's a way around it. So you got to go a little more ancient. This is a VIC-20. We've got one we have one on Skullspace's virtual list of items that we don't store on site, but that people are holding at home and can borrow. And it's got a built-in. Its firmware has a basic interpreter, and it's got general-purpose I/O pins. And so what I imagine you doing is, you're not going to want to do all your Bitcoin stuff or your modern stuff on an old platform like this. I imagine you could use an old platform like this to maybe bootstrap a slightly newer platform. And so here's what you would do. You would take a computer you don't trust, and you would write the code you wanted to run on that computer, and you wanted to run with some trust. And you'd have to compile it to assembly and compare, okay, does this assembly output match what I wrote? Now, of course, your platform may be lying to you. It may be giving you the assembly that corresponds to this code when you view it in an editor, right? But the underlying file may not be like this at all. And then you can do a matching of your assembly to your machine code. And again, you could be lied to there. So, and you'd want your program to be small enough to be able to do that. This is going to be time intensive even with a small program. So you're probably looking at like custom operating systems that you're trying to bootstrap to get yourself out of this trouble, right? So here's how you get around that. If you trust the VIC-20 hardware and you trust the firmware, then the high level here is that you could if you had some flash memory that could be moved around and programmed with I2C, which is like a 2-wire serial bus, you could do that on the general purpose I/O pins. Another feature of I2C is that it's like master-slave and you control the clocking. So this really ridiculous old computer, you could actually do it. There's actually a video on YouTube of one guy doing I2C with buttons by hand. So that, because it's all you, the master on this bus controls the clocking. So whatever pace you're working at. Okay, so then you move that flash memory to like an adapter that emulates a floppy for your old white box PC, or an one that makes it look like an ATA hard drive or USB mass storage. And then you're home free. That's the high level. Okay, so yeah, and you gotta do a bit of work if you're using the VIC-20 with basic interpreters. So it's gonna be hell. Okay, so first tool you would need would be a hex editor, and you would, because BASIC is the only direct programming platform you're getting when you just turn this machine on and you're not bringing in external media. It is okay if you had a hex editor and it showed you some checksums. Now you're in a situation where that hex that you generated from the assembly that you generated from the C on the computer you didn't trust, now you can actually just punch it in. It's going to take you a long time, but you're no longer relying on a computer telling you that this is what's actually on disk. You're now punching it in. And so the thing you would want to punch in would then be another bootloader you'd have to write 2 programs in BASIC. The second one would be a bootloader that can load a program that you've put on tape with the first program. So we're bootstrapping here. We're getting somewhere. And then again, relying on a computer you don't trust, you go through that same C to assembler to hex situation, probably to write a program for the VIC-20. And then this would be your one, because you don't want to do this I2C stuff in BASIC, right? You're probably going to write it in C. So you would move it over that way. You would enter it in hex, representing the MOS 6502 machine code, right? Instead of having to figure out how to do your IC2 bit banging in BASIC, right? Okay, so, and again, you could rely on a PC that you don't trust to feed you using I2C the program you're hoping to load and transfer to flash memory, and the program that you're running on the VIC at this point can show you a bunch of checksums. It can say your and so that way you don't have the program that it's ultimately destined for your flash memory and destined for your PC. You don't have to type the whole thing in. You load it in and you verify all the. You just verify on screen. Okay, this is right. This is right. This is right. And so then you're there. And this machine suggests a different approach. Someone at Skullspace has a hobby kit PDP-11. Now, and the really nifty thing about this one is the base model has no firmware at all, but it's still bootstrappable. Now, in the really, really olden days, if you wanted to bootstrap a computer that had no firmware, you had to use mechanical switches, and you had to put stuff in one at a time, and we don't want to do that. This HobbyKit PDP-11 with no firmware is kind of interesting because it's got microcode that can work with the serial port and let you put stuff in one memory address at a time. And so again, you could hook that up to a PC you don't trust. You could have that PC over the serial line say, okay, we're putting this byte in this memory, this byte in this memory, this byte in this memory. Disconnect the PC, connect a glass teletype, a terminal, and go and inspect every memory address that you've put in this thing to load to flash memory. Though I don't know if this has an interface like that. The other kind of old machine I'm thinking of that's self-programmable also are ones with open firmware. They have like a full fourth interpreter. So as long as you have the hardware to do general purpose I/O, you should be able to use a platform like that, again, to write to some flash memory, put that in an adapter, put it in a PC, now you're bootstrapped. All right, thank you, everyone. I'm doing questions on the side, not in here. That'll be the B track. Enjoy the rest of the A track.